Awesome. Cool. Hey, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
By the way, is it Merit? How do you say your name?
It's Marit.
Yeah.
It's like Margaret with no G. It's like the Scandinavian version of Margaret, if that helps.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. So, I'm Steve. Nice to meet you.
Mhm. Nice to meet you.
Uh, I think Kim Miller was the one who suggested that we chat.
Mhm.
As you know, I did a little cast with Scott.
Uh-huh.
You're in the family, right?
Yes, I'm married to Scott's brother. So
Yeah, yeah, I understand. So you're a professor. He's also a professor, right? Is that right? Or
my
not?
husband?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, we both teach at UC Davis. Uh-huh.
Wait, did you meet years ago when you were, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background? I'm kind of curious here because I know you were in Colorado originally, right? I was School of Mines, so I lived in that area. You went
Okay.
you went to
Yeah.
Northwestern and I went
So
to
I was born in North Carolina, but moved to Colorado as a baby.
Oh,
So I
oh,
grew up in Colorado, like in the Boulder area.
yeah.
And for undergrad, I went to Northwestern.
Huh?
And then for grad school, I actually went to UC Davis. And then, so both of my degrees are in English. And I also have a degree from Warren Wilson in North Carolina in poetry. And then I was a professor at CSU Bakersfield
Oh,
for 10 or 15 years. I lived there for 10 years anyway. And then we moved up to Sacramento. In 2015, I sort of arranged to do a research fellowship at Davis. I could have done it anywhere, but just because most of, Greg and Scott's family is around here and it was just a better place to raise our children. So yeah, so I've been teaching at Davis since 2016, I think. Yeah.
yeah.
And I, even though I'm a literary scholar by training, for about 10 years, I've been doing a lot of research, collaborative research in digital voice studies and performance studies, like basically what makes a voice sound interesting or boring to listen to.
Oh,
And in that research, I helped develop some open source tools for speech analysis. So I worked a lot with computer science people, but also neurobiologists who studies speech perception, linguistics, and of course, we were using a tool based on a large language model for speech recognition. So I became very intimate with that large language model. And I also teach writing. So just when ChatGPT was released, like these two kinds of sides of my research and developing expertise kind of crashed into each other. And I found that I had a lot to say. And, I mean, there's digital humanities as a whole field, but yeah, I found that I had more to offer than I expected, and perhaps something useful to offer that neither kind of straight STEM people nor straight humanities people uh, quite saw. Anyway,
yeah. In fact, I'm excited to talk about a bunch of things surrounding AI, obviously, but yeah, I'm actually on the hardcore STEM side,
yeah,
right? I and um, I actually see it's a great opportunity, especially with these LLMs, to open the world to folks that aren't traditional programmers or software engineers, but to
right.
really communicate with these tools, these
Mhm.
software tools, to do things that they previously couldn't do without having someone in between, like an
Yeah,
engineer. And
yeah,
it's like the operator concept. You tell someone what we want, and then they tell what you want, and before you know it, you totally miss the whole message. But so I'm totally excited by that. And then I saw a little bit looking in your background that you recently were awarded a grant, which was
yeah.
pretty cool. Um,
Mhm.
that's hopefully that funding is still continuing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's state funding. It's not a federal grant. And also, I mean, I don't know what the extent to which they're going to cancel funding, but I don't know. I mean, we are trying to increase equity in writing support and in AI literacy. So if equity is a bad word, I guess they would object, but I don't, anyway.
Well, it's the way I read that actually when I saw Davis had a blurb on it. So equity to me in this is not sort of by the color of your skin from my perspective. I see this as equity as a function of IQ. And, and honestly, what these LLMs and AI have done, if people are leveraging right, they basically add 400 or more points to your IQ to everyone. So in terms of like leveling the playing field, I think these are wonderful tools. And so I kind of look at it that way. But that's first thing that came to mind when I was looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a colleague in science and technology studies who's elaborately, she has an NEH fellowship, the same kind I had last fall, and that was on a poetry project, where she's elaborately uh, taking down the idea of IQ
Yeah.
and showing that it doesn't really exist in terms of there's no genetic basis for that, which is interesting. But people keep hoping that there is, and so they keep looking. But I agree with you on, I feel like AI can democratize access to expertise, but it also, I mean, I'm just coming at it from the perspective of education.
Yeah.
If it's not implemented thoughtfully in education, because these tools certainly were not designed for educational use, uh, it could really um, create a whole generation of hazardously incompetent workers who don't have, like these tools are very exciting for, already developed experts, like us to use because we can collaborate with them well and we can judge the output. But what I find with students is that they really need guidance in assessing AI output. They need reminders that it can be wrong, and if you imagine like, okay, you just ask chatbot to create like a Python script for you and it works, cool. What if it stops working and the chatbot can't identify the error and you're like, I don't know Python, I have no idea what's wrong, So I guess I'm concerned about like balancing using these in education, using these tools more like tutors in a tutorial role, not replacing humans, but in a kind of supporting tutorial role, rather than as ghostwriters or ghost coders. In the workplace, those kinds of applications um, are safer and can also increase efficiency. But it's really important to keep developing expertise and reading and writing skills because otherwise, uh, we're going to be, I mean, I don't think that machines are intelligent, but we're going to be, quote unquote, dumber than the machines in some really problematic ways. So we can't even use them intelligently.
Hmm. Interesting. You know, I've actually had some interesting last several weeks of true engagement with the AI to help generate code for me.
Uh-huh.
I've written millions of lines of code in
Yeah.
30 or so years. I've literally written millions of lines of code in the last 2 months through instructions
Yeah.
to natural language instructions. And I mean, I know a ton of languages. I hate Python, and so
Yeah.
I love the fact that it's generating Python for me because it's actually a great
Yeah.
exercise to instruct the computer what I want to have done, and then
Hmm.
it code almost near language form to me, and it's how other people would be interacting with the AI systems. And so, what's really intriguing to me is I've actually become incredibly dependent at this point. I don't even want to code ever again.
Yeah.
I
Right.
totally just want to instruct my vision and have it build it. But you're right, it gets into these situations where you have to kind of handhold it. And it's in some cases it's a junior program. And without the experience it's of programming, you can it can be dangerous, as you said. But I think it's totally enabling. And not only does it add IQ points, I think it basically gives people free workers. Pennies
Hmm.
on the dollar. You can have an army of workers for you, knowledge workers.
Hmm.
So this is great for people who have a lot of experience, but a little more challenging, I appreciate, for more junior folk. And that's perhaps what you're alluding to.
Yeah. And I'll share I just got to find it, a quote with you that you might find interesting along those lines. And you probably, the first thing I was going to say is, you probably came across this too, but like Andre Karpathy was said like in January 2023, the hottest new programming language is English.
Yeah.
So your like writing skills are kind of more important than ever. And writing skills, are not grammar, right? They are the ability to um, analyze a rhetorical situation, to know your audience and purpose and immediate context. And that is something that AI is always going to be bad at. Like, unless we, until we develop like Xenobots or something, which I think would be just, it's kind of like life, right? Because it can take in sensory input and stuff. You know, these are language-based models. So all they have access to is the words or text that you give them. And they do not know your immediate context unless you are sophisticated enough to prompt them with those details, right? So anyway, that's just important. But in terms of people who are already experts being in a better position to collaborate with them. So this might ring a bell, but there was a photographer, Boris Eldagsen, who turned down a Sony Award for Best Photograph in 2023 because he used generative AI to create it. But here's what he said. He said, for the first time in technology advancement, an older generation is better off because I know much more than a 15-year-old. A 15-year-old would generate a superhero. You start from your imagination and you describe what you would like to have, and you can make such a text prompt quite complicated. And my knowledge as a photographer, my knowledge as an artist makes it different in my prompting. It's kind of like co-creation. So it's very useful for him, but if you don't know the history of art and don't have all of the, intuitive knowledge that you get from your artistic practice for 30 years first, then, it's like, what do I do with this? It's not that you wouldn't come up with anything, but yeah, the art that he's going to make is probably better.
Interesting. The prompt engineering, as you're getting to, that's the experience that you bring to the table, right? And that's setting the context for your question or statement.
Yeah, and I prefer not to call it prompt engineering because I think it's writing. It's prompt writing.
Um, well, okay. I mean, the reason I term it, or
Well, I know that's the term. I'm just
yeah,
saying that
but
by calling it prompt engineering, we devalue the writing skills and the rhetorical awareness, like the social and cultural awareness that you need to prompt a chatbot intelligently. And engineering pays better. And so then you're like, okay, prompt engineer, I should hire a CS major. No, you should
oh
you should
no,
hire a history major, an English major. And
or
I'm not being
yeah, no, I know.
polemical. It's just that like writing is so valuable because it's training data has become so incredibly valuable, and they have run out of it. And I'm sure you saw that, article in Nature that got a lot of publicity in November, that these tools degenerate when they're trained on their own output.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I've known this
So,
for years.
so we have to be able to write more. We have to be able to write more text and we have to be able to write more code that is not simply generated by AI
Yeah,
if
yeah,
we want these tools to keep developing.
yeah. Content is absolutely king. It's I don't know if you know my background. Actually, I've been working in AI since the late '80s.
Hmm.
My whole graduate work was with neural networks. I had to program my own neural network computing system in order
Hmm.
to do the protein structural prediction work that I was doing at the time. And as you're aware, this last year they won the Nobel Prize
Yeah,
effectively
right,
in
yeah.
neural networks, right?
Yeah.
Well, I had 200 protein structures to work with to learn from, and I knew at that time that's not enough. I mean, you need thousands and thousands of examples, which is what the guys with Alpha.
The other guys who won the Nobel Prize, yeah,
They
for
had
all
it right. So I mean,
protein.
look, a lot of us were in the space early on, a
Yeah.
lot smaller by comparison today. But the reality is, content is critical for any kind of artificial intelligence or even AGI system, and humans are the ones who need to create it or annotate.
Yeah. And I think, content is also kind of this weirdly neutral term. I would call it expertise. I would call it human expertise, which is captured in prose or code, or images or music. Yeah.
Well, so where it starts to blur the lines a little bit. It's in these diffusion models. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but uh,
Yeah.
since
Stable diffusion. Yeah.
yeah, and so those are kind of implicit levels of supervised training. Where for those who don't know what it is, you basically take, let's say, an image context, you have a clear image, and then you're wearing glasses. So the way I like to give an example is you take your glasses off, and things get like fuzzy. Uh,
Mhm.
but you can sometimes guess what you're looking at, and that's sort of a classification thing. But then you put your glasses back on. Oh yeah, that's a lamp that I'm looking at, or oh, I'm not sure it's a lamp. But you basically do a lot of that back and forth between fuzzied up and clear images with
Mhm.
classification. Well, the nice thing about some of these diffusion models is you often don't need a human to do the classification, because the model is really primarily learning going from fuzzy to clear, or in some cases clear to fuzzy. But the point is that those can be somewhat unsupervised, and
Yeah.
that's really, really important, because I think this when we're taken to the next level, you can start talking about using video or satellite imagery or things that don't necessarily require the bottleneck of human annotation. But at the end of the day, I think the keys for at least the direction we're going today, human curation or human content is just so critical. And you're right, running out of it, you can't train these systems on Twitter or X because it's garbage. Even these echo chambers of social media, it's just total
Mhm.
garbage. You need the best quality human curated content to get the best quality AI systems, for today anyway. And so I mean, I totally agree with you, and that's why I don't think any person who's kind of afraid of being replaced, they just have to repurpose their thinking in so many ways. And that's, look, I am the expert in content creation, and the AI systems need this. So
Yeah, and there's you might have heard of this. Paul Hines in 1999, he wrote this article about the curse of expertise. Um, and what he says is that basically experts forget how they learned, and it makes them bad at teaching novices. So,
yeah,
I just think we're at a very particular moment where, there are all sorts of amazing applications, I think, especially in, the biomedical field and so on. Um, because all of us who are now professionals were educated without access to these tools. And so we're in such a good position to assess the output or to curate, the next data set or whatever. But just like to take the example of, like if we can identify cancer better
yeah.
or, fractures or something, like just if you gave that whole data set and like the AI analysis to someone who didn't have experience doing that kind of analysis without these tools, how can they tell if it's right? So it's just this weird loop. But in terms of like higher levels of expertise, you may know the book Dennis E. Tennant's Literary Theory for Robots: How Computers Learn to Write. He's an English professor and a former Microsoft software developer at Columbia. And he makes the point that, I mean, it's a good analogy because I think writing is more valuable now than at any time since the invention of the printing press and writing skills. Expert writing skills. He said that the printing press put a lot of scribes out of work, right? But at the same time, it raised the value of higher level literacies.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Well, one of the things I like to think of in terms of these new technologies. I speak English, right? I read English reasonably well. I don't read near as much as I should. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I
Mhm.
know a ton of computer languages,
Mhm.
but I don't know any other real language besides English and maybe a little Latin from my early
Yeah.
days. But being able to communicate is critical with any level of engagement, right? Whether it's human to human or human to tool. These tools, I think, are really enabling the ability to have anyone at really any level articulate their thoughts, which communicate through a language that is not overly sophisticated. And if you think of it that way, it basically becomes enabling to everyone. So I
What do you
totally,
mean, though, to communicate their thoughts through a language that's not too sophisticated? What do you mean?
well, you can be very sloppy with your questions, and you could have spelling errors. You can just your thoughts can be very jumbled, and a lot of times these LLMs can pick that up and totally understand and rephrase it and present it, or even answer questions that you ask at all levels. And it's pretty incredible in that regard. And setting the context, if you take if you just look at ChatGPT, for example, it's often just the sliding window of what you provided. But they've opened the door for, and they have the availability for these project level things where you can provide a bunch of documents and
Yeah,
other
right.
context that helps fill out. So you can take a whole body of work that's your own, for example, and just point to a drive and say, "This is what I've written in the past.
Yeah,
Do it in my voice." Or
right. And Notebook LM can make podcasts based on a
right.
document and so on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so that I mean that's incredibly powerful stuff. But I appreciate a number of people are afraid of it. Other people totally embrace it. But I'm kind of curious from the because you're an educator and you're dealing with people, students at an age that I, I'm wondering what you see as sort of the biggest challenge to get them to do what you and I probably do naturally all the time. That's just constantly want to learn new things, right? I mean, I see overall a general sort of dumbing down in our society. People think in terms of small tweets. People are not sure what information is real or not, but they don't seem to be, I think, making the best decisions lately. And I think it's because they almost are stunted, maybe information overloaded, but I've seen a general trend for people not wanting to have a quest for new knowledge, that they see it more as a destination rather than a journey. So I'm wondering, first of all, do you see this as well in your students? And if you don't, then we'd move on. But if you do, I mean, what do you see as a strategy to kind of get uh, folks to be more interested in sort of stepping up
Mhm.
next level?
Well, I mean, I don't think I have a representative sample of the population because, UC students are very motivated. And I teach mostly upper division classes and honors students. I mean, not, those are two separate things. So
Yeah.
they want to learn. I do think motivation becomes, in the educational space, motivation is more important than ever because, the one possible application of a chatbot is just to let it cheat for you, right? Students, in my experience, don't really want to cheat because they recognize that it's cheating themselves out of learning. But um, if you're taking a class where where you don't see the point of the class, or you're stressed out, because you've taken on too much, like those are the contexts in which you might cheat, right? And I'm just sharing this because like it's been a big concern in education. Um, so motivating them to learn, and teaching in an engaging manner and reminding them of the value of that. Um, and having, treating them like the young adults they are and like having an open conversation about AI. I think those things are really important so that they don't get lazy. But in terms of the larger population, I think it's just the culture of distraction. You know, people and reading skills fell, during the pandemic with the disaster of online, learning, and they have not come back. And before that, of course, just if you can, our attention spans, I think, have really atrophied just from, mobile phones and everything else. And people do not, because reading requires sustained attention, and patience and discipline. And ideally, you're interested in something and you stick with it. But Um, you probably have heard this as well. I mean, this would sound encouraging. Um, but okay, so you probably heard that the 2024 Oxford Word of the Year was brain rot.
I did not, but that's interesting.
Okay. I'll define it for you. The supposed deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state, especially viewed as the result of overconsumption of material, now particularly online content, considered to be trivial or unchallenging. But a runner-up made the shortlist for the Oxford Word of the Year last year was slop, which was defined as art, writing, or other content generated using artificial intelligence, shared and distributed online in an indiscriminate or intrusive way, and characterized as being of low quality, inauthentic, or inaccurate. So it might sound hopeful that, people recognized slop enough to be like, oh, that slop is bad. I'm not going to pay attention to that AI generated content. But I don't think slop is the real problem. It's the stuff, it's like an uncanny valley of like fluent, seemingly accurate stuff that is actually, you know, not just false or misleading in some way. And I think that's all over the place. And just in the culture of distraction, we are losing critical skills that uh, are necessary for a functioning democracy and civil discourse, and also the advancement of knowledge. So I think, it sounds paradoxical because I wouldn't say I'm for or against AI. It's just that in order to collaborate well with AI, you need a lot of time away from technology. And when you do interact with technology, it's got to be in an appropriate role, in a limited supportive role. Um, yeah, J.C. Linklater, I think, in 1960 wrote this book called, or not a book, sorry, an article called Man-Computer Symbiosis. And he said even back then, and he really predicted where we were going. He said, we're always going to be in this symbiotic relationship. And uh, I mean, he wasn't worried about them taking over, but so I just thinking about the way we integrate technology into our lives and into our intellectual and emotional lives. I just think there's not always a lot of critical uh, thought that goes into that, and without sustained attention, yeah, nobody's going to be thinking very hard.
Yeah, critical thinking is I guess becoming a lost art. You know, um, I
But I think it's also the pressure of speed. Sorry, I'll just say one more thing. So you probably heard about this that in December of 2022, Stack Overflow banned AI generated content because, and that was pretty quick, right? But people were posting, ChatGPT coding advice because they could create it really fast. And they either didn't recognize that it was bad advice or they didn't bother to check.
hmm. No, that's a great example. Stack Overflow is critical for programming, as is GitHub
Yeah.
and other things like that. But I mean, that's again, you need to keep the content pure, and you contaminate it in so many ways when you start using AI generated content to train AI again. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. And I think it's just partly the speed of software development and the speed of capitalism, that encourages inattention or, lack of sustained critical attention.
Yeah, we're both in our own little bubbles in that regard. You as a university professor, and I tend to because I'm overeducated and on the technical side, right?
Yeah.
So I take so much for granted, and I've forgotten. Actually, haven't. It was brutal in my undergrad years as an engineering student. I don't forget that pain, but if you don't live through that,
Yeah.
see how
The
people can.
struggle is really necessary.
And so that's, I want to talk a little bit about that, the hermetic eustress. And actually, as an educator, I heard Galloway use this phrase, is great, that the job of an educator is to damage the muscle between your ears so as to correct stronger. You know,
Yeah.
and
Your brain should hurt some of the time. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so actually when you mention the word cheat, I mean, it's just such an academic word. The reality is today, unlocks or cheats are things I'm all over. To get me to get an answer more quickly to achieve a task.
Well, that's not cheating.
Uh, well, I
It's
guess
it's a shortcut, you know.
so. So in the academic sense, cheating is okay. You're taking a test or you have an assignment, and you have to provide a result in order to get a grade, right? I mean, what's your perspective? What's your definition of cheating in your context?
Well, I'm looking at Merriam-Webster. To deprive of something valuable by the use of deceit or fraud.
Um, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I don't, that's on the negative side. If I can cheat to get something to do something for me more rapidly than if I were to
Yeah,
just,
I wouldn't call that cheating. I mean,
oh,
cheating has a moral valence. You know, you can cheat other people. So if a student cheats, and I'm just using that language because, this was a big concern when ChatGPT first came out, and it's still a concern of um, a lot of instructors. Uh, if you cheat, so you're either deceiving the professor and saying, I wrote this code or, essay or whatever, when you didn't, and you're in that class to learn certain skills. And when you get a grade in that class, and a degree and so on, that is supposed to mean that you have those skills. But you don't have those skills if you just use the chatbot to create this. It's like, you're pretending this is mine. This is the product of my mind. No, it's not. It's the product of a chatbot. So that, I mean, on one hand, sure, it's deceiving the teacher, but the law, I care about that, but I care a lot more about the development of the students' minds. So, some people are penalizing this very drastically. One of my current students just said she heard about somebody who was kicked out of Davis for a whole quarter, like forced to take an entire quarter off and put on academic probation for using ChatGPT on a lab report.
that's
So if
absurd.
I had a student do that, I would say, you know, I'm going to have to fail you for that assignment, but I would probably let them revise it or not revise it, but I would be like, okay, you can write that anew. And I would have a talk with them about, what they are not learning because it used to be just rich kids could hire someone to cheat for them, to do their work for them. It is democratized access to cheating, right? So I don't think that I just wouldn't call I wouldn't call something positive, something that increases your efficiency or, democratizes access to expertise. I wouldn't call that cheating. I would call it a workaround. I would call it a shortcut. I would call it a tool for efficiency. But your use of it, especially when you acknowledge the use of it, and you're supposed to, obviously, when you publish papers and everything, or develop a tool, as long as the use is acknowledged, it's not cheating.
Okay, I can appreciate the coming back to the word deceit, but I guess maybe it's time to reframe how we look at education. Uh, because at the end of the day, if education is merely to get your grades, get
Yeah,
your
which is terrible.
it's
Yeah.
useless. It's totally useless. At the end of the day, it needs to be practical experience that you can apply in the growth and enrichment of your life and others around you. Um, so I don't need to be tested on how to use a calculator or slide rule. It's
Mhm.
just,
Right. Yeah.
I
Mhm.
know, in fact, I think some of the best courses I've ever had were ones that like, hey, look, the grade's irrelevant, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Here's the problem, and you come up, in fact, this was in computer science, we even had that. They said, look, if you have to learn 6 languages to solve this problem, fine. If you don't
Mhm.
know any languages to solve this problem, fine. We just need to get this problem solved.
Yeah.
And so That's practical. And you know, I appreciate this on the technical side, but when we
Yeah.
do some of the art side, um, you still have to encourage people to read the literature and learn the critical thinking, and there's guidance to do that. But I, at the end of the day, we want to have people graduating from these higher education uh, institutions that can be productive contributors to society, and then also can sustain their own life and their family's life, right? So,
Mhm.
I, again, I guess I'm a little softer on the word cheating because I don't really think of it in terms of the deceit as much. And if you
Well,
think,
you wouldn't say that a kid shouldn't learn to read and write at an advanced level, right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
You wouldn't say that a kid should not learn to read and write at an advanced level.
Yeah, yeah, I would not say that, right?
Yeah. So it's just depends on what's appropriate. So I'll give you an example. And I don't know if I sent this to you, but I wrote a short thing about the kind of the implications for writing and coding both of these chatbots. And I interviewed some computer science professors at Davis. And as I said, I worked with computer scientists and for about 10 years and also like supervised undergrads and grad students and for my research with them. Um, and, so in a very introductory programming course, they don't let the students use ChatGPT except in a very limited tutorial role, right? And then in an upper division course, right, data structures or something, they'd be like, use whatever you want. But by that point, they can presumably evaluate the outputs and think critically about it. But how are they going to be able to do it? So it's not about banning things. It's about what's appropriate for each level. Um, I read this thing on the wall of my older daughter's honors math classroom when she was in seventh grade. It was called a calculator oath that her teacher came up with. And they all had to sign this. It says, I, your name, know that I am the brains behind this tool. I promise to use a calculator only when necessary and not to use it for basic computations I can do mentally. I will record my calculations and always check for reasonableness. That's what you got to do in seventh grade. And then later you're like, okay, I understand conceptually, you know, how division works or whatever, trigonometry. So it's okay for me to use a calculator. And you don't start out using a graphing calculator. First, you have to learn to graph. So it's just really about the level. Um, so
Huh.
I think it's kind of a misconception of the situation to think that we need to radically change education.
Well, I guess one of the things
Or
that,
or maybe I'm not understanding you. Maybe you just have
well,
to. I'm
yeah,
not sure what you think education is doing now or how it might need to change.
well, I think there are a lot of things that need to change with our education system across the board. But let me back up for a minute. So, if when we looked at during the closures, one of the first things I said, this is going to be a great opportunity. Newton invented calculus during the plague, right? It's just like,
Yeah, it was good. It was good for some people. Yeah.
what it, well, okay. But so I saw it as a great opportunity. It was actually one of the most engaging years from my perspective, technologically and business wise. And
Mhm.
I operated by Zoom for many years prior to the pandemic. But the
But it
reason,
was it was but it was terrible if you were in kindergarten
no, that I get. I
or a
mean,
senior in high school. Yeah.
yeah, but the point is that really was born out of it in so many different ways. A bunch of new technologies. AI really came into its own right after, actually kind of during a
Yeah.
little and
Mhm.
prior to is when it's being
Yeah.
developed.
July
Really,
2021 was
right,
like when the GitHub stuff. Yeah.
right. But the 17 was attention's all you need, the Google paper, and so it's kind of been around for a while, and we were doing this, as I said, decades ago. But at the end of the day, it was really, really supercharged coming out. And so some people liken AI to fire. It's not the printing press, but fire, something that
Mm.
totally separate, that separated, you know, humans from, beast in so many ways. And
Mm.
I think AI is an opportunity to do that within our own, society. But if we have to kind of we have to kind of rethink a lot of the way we do things. If we leverage these tools in the right way, where people as I said, get the extra few hundred points on their IQ, where they have basically free knowledge workers, can free ourselves up to spend more time on the arts and the things that are pretty much getting diminished today, that we we really need out of things like a pandemic that you saw from out of the dark ages, the Renaissance, right? I mean, that is really what I'm hoping will happen. But unfortunately, people are graduating universities without jobs, right? And they're,
Well, and it's much harder to get a job as a CS major right now. Yeah.
is it really? That's true.
Yes, because low-level coding skills are not in demand anymore.
Oh yeah, well they just have to learn how to think.
Well, here's the thing though, like I can send you this article. There was an article recently in the New York Times. In an AI world, should you still learn to code? The problem is because some veteran went to a coding boot camp that used to get people jobs and then suddenly he can't get a job, like he needs to get a college degree, right? But
Huh.
they're saying like people are getting entry-level software developer jobs, but they're just told like, okay, just, prompt the AI. And then, well, lo and behold, because they're entry level, they can't assess the output. So then their supervisors end up doing all of that work for them and they're just sitting there, they're not learning.
Huh.
It's a real problem. Because again, I would just describe it to the curse of expertise, and I've talked to people who work UCSF and like supervising interns and somebody at Adobe, like, and they're just like, I guess I need to like supervise how the interns are using ChatGPT because I think they're using it too much and their work isn't very good, because they're not as sophisticated about using it. And this guy from Adobe was like really struggling to like train this new tool and like, I don't know, some obscure programming language because there's just not a lot of code out there. And I was like, I think you might need to hire a human who knows the programming language. And he's like, yeah, I guess I am going to have to hire a person.
Yeah, it's well, like I said, it's on the tech side, it's having to repurpose towards being more of a designer, uh,
Yeah.
to
Curator, supervisor. Yeah.
to know what to code, and then recognize when they're look. I've just spent the last several days trying to get out of holes that the AI is coded me into, and I'm
But at
just
least you got there faster, right? You got into the whole spec.
yeah, right. But it's painful because then I have to go start looking through literally hundreds of thousands of lines of code that I hadn't written, and that's a little frustrating. But
Yeah, and then you want the tool to like find the
yeah,
problems
fix
for
it.
you, and like it can up to a point, but
I think that's the fastest things that are evolving are these integrated development environments, right?
like Replit and
Yeah,
yeah, you
right,
mentioned another.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can, I think those will improve markedly, but it's to the point where I hope it's freeing us up from
Yeah.
mundane, just, just like,
Yeah, I hope it is. I hope it is for lots of, mundane and tedious tasks. It's just the really interesting stuff. Humans are still pretty central.
yeah, yeah. And so that's why I don't think anyone should be totally afraid, if you will.
Mhm.
I totally appreciate wanting to be careful because in understanding the risks associated with, but in terms of reframing,
Well, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, it's just saying in terms of reframing education, just like many, many years ago, people were forced to go through in math, simple multiplication tables and long division, and that I always was irritated by because it was boring and I wasn't excited with math until calculus, right? And you could
Yeah.
argue, well, you have to be able to add and subtract. Yeah, but not long division, right? So when you start removing the things that aren't as necessary because they're just kind of bottlenecks, I think it opens up new possibilities and will pull.
Yeah, and I think we're just at a point where it's hard to figure out which things aren't necessary. I mean, I do think that reading and editing are going to become super important. Not to say that writing won't, because we do have to, generate the pure prose and code, but um, you know, if you use AI to generate a draft of something, you know, you're not doing the writing, you're doing the editing.
Yeah.
But editing is a very high level skill, just as code review, is a very high level skill. So again, it's just a higher level of expertise becomes more important.
Yeah, right. So, well, so I wanted to touch on that actually because I know so you teach well grant writing classes or like and uh,
Yeah, and I can tell you about that grant. Sorry, but
yeah, I was talking with Scott about how to tell stories. The reality is human beings, their brains are wired to transmit and receive stories. They
yeah.
learn best
Mhm.
that way, and that's people are most engaged with stories.
Yeah.
And so um, often some simplified ways of communicating stories are the most efficient ones that engage like laughter and or sometimes sadness. But that that art, the art of storytelling, again, it's almost a bit of a lost art. But you think if you look at the most successful people on the planet, they're great storytellers.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think at the end of the day, we want to have education teach people a little bit more about how to tell stories um, and engage others because when we work together, we're synergistic. Some of the parts greater than the whole,
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
stories help people work together.
Yeah, and they also engage people. So one of my favorite books for teaching science writing it's by Joshua Schimmel. I think he's an environmental science professor at UC Santa Barbara, but it's called Writing Science: How to Write Papers That Get Cited and Proposals That Get Funded. And it's all about like making your scientific papers into stories. And he draws heavily on literature and writing guides from authors. Um, and what he emphasizes that is that, I mean, what's the core of a story? Like, I don't know if he doesn't say exactly this way, but like it's a conflict, you know, it's a problem. People like problems and they like stories of problems being attacked and people attempting to solve them. And they like characters that they can identify with. And, your character in a scientific paper might be mitochondria instead of like, an assassin or something. Um, but yeah, storytelling is really important. And I think we're at a point where people are, just kind of confused about what skills to emphasize because, oh, well, computer science major is no longer, a pass to a high-paying job. And when you kind of scratch the surface of all the stuff people are writing about, like they keep emphasizing reading and writing and communication skills. And this is also, somebody at OpenAI, Logan Kilpatrick, was saying like reading, writing, and speaking are the three underlying skills that really matter in 2024, and focusing on those skills are um, will future-proof you for an AGI world, by which he meant artificial general intelligence, which I don't think we're probably going to achieve anytime soon. But it's just, and also in that, should you still learn to code in an AI world? People are like, huh, well then what do they need to learn? And it's like, oh, well, communication. Anyway, so yeah, storytelling I think falls under that for sure. And the humanities, excel at storytelling. So
And I think drawing associations, critical thinking, uh, learning from nature, these are things that I mean just should need to get buried into the framework of education if they're not really there today. Maybe they
well,
are.
I think they're there, but they've been defunded.
Yeah.
The disciplines that really teach critical thinking, what are they? Philosophy, history, English. And those departments have been shrunk. And even natural sciences, like they don't get anything like the funding that engineering and computer science do.
Yeah, just have to follow the money on that.
Yeah, well, but they've said like these things are not useful, so we're not funding them, so students don't major in them, or they're discouraged from majoring in them. And then lo and behold, we need them.
Yeah, being again critical thinker, observing and drawing conclusions from really important skills. And yeah, I've always said this kind of thing that nature solved a ton of our problems. We just have to learn to find where the
Yeah.
where the
Mhm.
solutions are. I, Similarly, like my undergrad is in chemistry, and I used to personify molecules.
Yeah.
And some are reactive and some are aggressive, some are more stable. And
Mhm.
organic chemistry was wonderful to me, being the one who would think about how functional groups can attack one another and things like that. And I always thought in terms of what did I observe in society, people's and their behavior. They're responding not too differently from the way molecules are interacting. And it's because the macroscopic mimetics the microscopic, right? But just being able to observe things around us and applying that to our specific problems at hand.
Yeah, and I think, if you're teaching chemistry, that would be a much more fun way to teach it than like dry and objective. My this neurobiologist I collaborate with a lot, like loved Inside Out because he's like, this really helps explain
Inside
the
out.
brain. And so,
Oh,
the movie Inside Out?
I don't know. I don't think I've seen it.
Oh
No,
my gosh.
you have to.
Well, it's about there's an Inside Out and Inside Out 2, and it's animated, but
Okay.
it's about a girl, she's like 10, she moves from Minnesota to San Francisco, and like she's a hockey player. But it all takes place inside her brain. And
Oh,
and there are like, whatever the major emotions, anger and sadness and are just their characters in the movie. And he uses it to teach.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's storytelling again in terms that people understand, and because you're talking about a broad spectrum of capability of understanding,
Mhm.
anything that helps facilitate that engagement or communication, I think
Yeah.
is powerful and definitely not cheating. You know,
No, no, it's not.
Uh,
I think the other thing I would say just about education is like you got to think about the academic pipeline. So, I mean, I was talking recently after this chief scientific officer from Microsoft came to give a talk at Davis, and then there was some, dinner afterward, and a computer science professor was like, "I love, paying $200 a month for ChatGPT because it, kind of replaces a master's degree student for me, which is
yeah,
more expensive."
yeah.
Um, but like,
Not much.
if everybody does that, like, okay, well, who's going to replace him? Who's going to become that professor? Like we have to keep training people.
Oh yes, no question, no question. You have to keep
Yeah.
kind of pushing,
And
standard.
I don't think people are thinking enough about the longer term implications of relying on these tools as, the way you would have for replacing certain workers. Hopefully the level of expertise will just keep rising, but I think it's a little bit different than I mean, I don't know if I agree, but that it's like fire, but it's very different. Um, the the invention of the printing press democratized access to knowledge, and increased literacy. It didn't at the same time pose a risk to literacy through over reliance. Nobody was going to over rely on a book because it's a struggle to learn to read, and it's a struggle to understand a book. It's not a struggle to use AI.
Well,
So it's weird. It's just, I do think it's a new problem.
is
Most technologies haven't done this.
so is wait, so is your argument is that one of your fears is that we would become too reliant on.
Yes, over reliance. I mean, you can find this all over the place. Lots of computer science educators are writing about it. Writing studies people, but I would say the computer science more than anybody else. Yes, the risks of over reliance.
Well, you could think about a lot of the things that we depend on today that are just basic electricity into our home, warm water.
There's no danger in that, though. I
Well,
mean, there's no danger in keeping ourselves warm, right? I mean, there's pollution caused by the power plants,
Oh no,
depending.
I thought we were talking about the reliance of it because
Yeah,
even the poorest people in the United States are living better than the
yeah.
kings.
No, that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
but yeah, so but I look, it's so funny. I'm not being argumentative on this one. I've become over reliant on the technology,
Yeah.
and I get irritated beyond belief if I have to.
If you have to code yourself, you're
Well,
like,
and so a great example. So Claude AI is
yeah,
one of the better tools,
yeah.
and
I've started using that in the past
yeah,
year.
and especially when I code, and I'm hammering it with a lot of things, and then it just no more cloud for you for 5 hours or so because
Mhm. Yeah,
you've used too many. And I look, I'm like a drug addict. I'll pay for more. I literally buying more email
yeah, right.
addresses so I can use my $20 worth. But it is a dopamine pull too. It's almost like how some people are in social media. For me, it's
Mhm.
I got cut off. Oh my, that's what I need it, and I think they're getting sharp enough to cut you off at the times where you most need it, right? And so
Yeah, and also, I mean, Claude is, better than some at kind of simulating human-like dialogue,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and I have a student writing about this right now, just that why chatbots are good at misinformation because we get, because it's human-like in its interaction, just at the level of the language, people tend to trust it. And there was a term that we just use it for heuristic reality monitoring, you know.
yeah.
Um,
I
so just like a shortcut to like, is my interpretation of reality correct? Let me ask the chatbot, whatever I'm studying. And so you forget that there's like code behind it, that I just mean it's and I'm sure you heard about like there's at least one teenager who committed suicide because of, his relationship with this character AI. Like
yeah,
somehow he thought that he was going to be able to be with it if he killed himself. I mean, so I just mentioned that because you mentioned the dopamine, I
yeah,
don't mean you just want to like make more progress faster with your work.
yeah, yeah.
But it's also, it's an addictive kind of interaction, you know,
And like
maybe partly just because it's more fun than writing code.
yeah, yeah. It's actually Claudia in particular is one of those that I actually start to personify because I
Yeah.
can
Mhm.
tell when I start using it earlier in the morning, it's not heavily used as much by others or even me. It's actually much more productive and effective, and it starts getting sloppy over time.
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
use it almost like a human being. It almost tires,
Yeah.
right? And but it's unfortunate it doesn't push back enough. Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I think you made an error here," and it's, "Oh, you're right," but I'm not right. I was wrong.
Yeah, and I haven't done this, but I know you can like give it settings like how challenging you want it to be or whatever. But people students have told me like, ChatGPT is too sycophantic.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Claude, you can get to challenge you more.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think there's eh, only a few of us, relatively speaking, are really leveraging AI in the way that for today's LLMs AI.
Right.
There's still a massive percentage of the population that maybe they've done a few things, but
Yeah, they just aren't experimenting with it that much. And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think there is a lot of fear. I'm afraid I do want to tell you something about this grant, but then I have to go because I have a
Oh,
yoga class at 4:30 that I really want to
I'm
get
sorry.
to.
Look at you. Actually, Scott mentioned that you're a yoga.
Yes, yeah, I'm a yoga fanatic. So this grant, it's a $1.5 million grant over 3 years. It involves UC Davis, three CSUs, and four community colleges. And the basic approach is very simple, but we did a big study at UC Davis last year that went well, and we have an article coming out about it. Basically, when students write an assignment, they draft, an essay or whatever the assignment is, then they get peer review feedback, using a rubric that's very specific for that assignment. And then they get feedback from a chatbot, and then they assess both the peer review feedback, the chatbot feedback, and then explain, what was helpful, what wasn't, and then how they're going to revise. And then they revise. So I feel like that puts them in kind of strengthens their position in relation to AI. So it's not like write my essay for me and then expect them to be able to evaluate how good it is because they've never tried it. They might not be really good at it yet. So they try it, they see what a competent peer thinks about their efforts, and then they get the AI output, and they're not just like, okay, I'll take its advice. They really have to assess whether it's useful advice for their audience and purpose and so on. It seems to work really well for building AI literacy because they're like, I know what kind of role to give it in my learning process. I'm not just trusting it. I'm not just afraid of it or unfamiliar with it anymore. Anyway, so that's what we're doing.
And are you expecting some outcome out of that to almost like a controlled experiment scenario to
Yeah,
see?
yeah, yeah. We did this with 10 classes and 654 students last year. I'll tell you two things and then I just really have to go, but just two of the findings. One is that when peers and AI agree, they reinforce each other because sometimes students might doubt AI, sometimes they might not trust their peers. But if they agree, they're like, oh, I guess I should do this revision. And when they disagree, they're complementary. They usually offer something different. And so it does increase, support for the writing process.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, look, I'll let you go. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yep.
Honestly, and when you have publishable results on this, I would love
Yeah,
it.
yeah. We had an article accepted in a journal called Computers and Composition, and we're just finalizing revisions. As soon as that's done, I will share it with you.
Honestly, I'd love to see the peer review process revamped because it's just insanely broken in so many ways.
Yes, I know. Well, I know it's not compensated enough, which doesn't. Do you actually live in San Diego?
Carlsbad, yeah,
Oh, okay.
close
Yeah.
to the Millers, so
I'll be down there sometime in, I think maybe Easter weekend or something.
yeah, yeah. Let's touch base. Love to chat more, and yeah, obviously we talk about all around, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'll let you run. I know you got
Okay.
the yoga fix.
Nice to meet you.
All right, take care. Bye
Bye.
bye.